Okay. In the classical sense, pantheism, regardless of its doctrinal nuances, assumes the identity of the being between the world and God. Pantheism does not necessarily refuse the attribute of creature to the principle of the world, but really identifies the existence of the world with its being, equally assigning to it all the attributes of divinity itself. Inside the pantheistic doctrinal spaces, the prerogatives of the creative deity operate under completely different forms as compared to the vision of the monotheistic traditions. The postulation of an identity of being between God and creation transforms, however, the idea of God into a problematic issue right from the moment when thinking is confronted with the evidence of imperfection that characterizes the world. In general, theological reflections focused on pantheism limit themselves within a perspective that does not change its discourse and that propose variation of the same theme. Two problems. The first, and the most used, brings into discussion the idea that an eternal world identifying itself with God is equivalent with the action of introducing its imperfection in God himself. Starting from this identity of being, fluctuating changes of the world would suggest that God himself, like the world, is subject to becoming. This hypothesis constrained us to admit the idea of a ceaseless transformation of their common substance. Such a vision circumscribes both the world and God in an eternally evolutive plan along which between God and creature there would be only degrees of difference inside of one being, which causes itself into the vicious cycle of a purposeless evolution. Second, equality, the theological criticism postulates that any form of identity between the created reality and God could only be excluded by accepting the created nature of the world and of man. If a human being were uncreated in nature, it's biological and cannot find any convenient explanation. Even the inevitability of death points to the idea that death naturally belongs to the structure of the world and that any effort to conquer is doomed to fail. If this is constitutive of the being, and the being is consubstantial with God, then the idea of end will be implicitly presenting God. The series of consequences can continue without limit. Okay, the phenomenological perspective about Christian problem of creation. I try to resume because my prior point of function. In the limited dynamic of thought, God, as being different from the world and from any other ontological existence, is identified with the absolute, perfect and constant with himself. He acts eternally, undertaking both the fact of being free of any determination in this external action and also the faithfulness to the immutability of his own self. The immutability can be thought as the indefinable sum of an infinity of qualities. God can freely create an ontological level which does not substantially depend on his being. He does it by the very datum of his absolute perfection, possible in the act of his constant towards his freedom of being eternally faithful to him, to his own immutable self, as well as against any fluctuations opposed to this faithfulness. But before thinking him from the viewpoint of the attitude of creature, God is himself eternal, as of himself the one who is. In reality, the subsistent act of existing itself, subsistence, seems the most appropriate formula to encompass the absolute being who is God, with the condition of including the notion of being in the meaning of the act existing esse. However, not as a being, hence, formed of essence and existence. The creative act, ex nihilo versus fiat. The creative act is the plastic expression of God's freedom of will, who wants to make something to exist outside of him. This otherness is not an imagining of a being, but a result of a creative force existing in the willingness to set up as creation a totally different other in relationship with him. This new ontological created level should not be understood as a prolonging of his being, because the faithfulness towards his, our imperfection, denies the absolute any fragmentation or recreation. Such a placement would be contrary to the very idea of perfection, since perfection is a consequence of the steadfastness toward the freedom of being forever the same. The time of creation, and the dialogue with eternity. I noted this in the part 1, but I'm sorry. Time starts alongside with the creator fiat to be, to establish an interval given to the existence from its very beginning until its eschatological limit. Thus, it cannot be contained in the meaning of manifestation of eternity, but as distance between two moments placed on by God into eternity, the creation and the world and its end. From this perspective, the creation from nothingness, ex nihilo, implies the time, starting with the first moment of creation, is just a radical measure which must be passed to advance towards God. The simultaneity of at the beginning with the creation indicates the relationship between the eternity with what it appears that is with time. Now, the dynamic dialogue between the eternity of God and the transience of creation. Inasmuch as God recedes for eternity the temporal response of the creature, then the existence itself takes over something from eternity through its participation during the bestwood time interval. Thus, while witnessing a dynamic dialogue between God's eternity and the creation transience, in other words, his eternal love, through his call and acceptance, respond to the temporary movement of creation which aspired to perfection. The transcendence as a sign of illimitableness. The phenomenology of the difference from the establishment of the conscience. If we consider transcendence as a nothingness, then it does not overcome the process of objectivity of a necessity of an essential level operated with the real of conscience. As a matter of fact, it is aspiration toward the illimitability. The conscience is in search of an immaterial substantiation of the transience. In other words, what the conscience ponders as formation, or what is it postulates as substantiation, does not coincide with nothingness, being even the initial nothingness dissolved at the same time with the act of creation, but it actually is a willingness transcending any other pre-existing condition, any other anteriority, thinking and acting so that something be brought to existence. Besides, the identification of illimitability with transcendence can only be related to the acceptance of this creative will. Thus, in order to infer it as reality, it takes something more than an objectivation of semantic nature generated by the necessity of consciousness to move forward toward the unlimited, like an acute psychological need of joining something absolute. Experiencing transcendence as a limitless reality, as a world offer, and not just as the necessity of the conscience, take place in assuming the freedom of intersubjectivity relating with the other, admitting the existence of the death of the conscience with which the meeting and the relationship does not happen coming from its likeness, but from its absolute difference. Thus, acceptance in the plan of relationality of another conscience under the sign of difference comes to substantiate the inner process underlying the transcendence of conscience itself. The cosmos as different reality. In relation to the conceptual structures that founded the Christian paradigm of a concrete reality, we are witness of a cosmological nuance that connects the creation as reality to the creative will in absolute relation with the divine attributes. God remains always truthful, not only to his word of Peter, but also to the perfect decision of his own will, faithfulness predictable by the immutability and permanency attuned with an absolute existence. If through the order of this absolute will, and therefore perfect, an existence has a beginning, and logically, a self-conscious, setting by the very rationality that created it, then, through the irrevocable nature of the same will, the existence remains eternal in a Christian paradigm, in a dissimilar condition, transfigurated but for eternity. Valorizing and prolonging the phenomenological evidence of this perspective, the first point that is revealed by the functionality of the world itself is that of a quadraturality, of a structure made of elements in harmony with each other, continually striving towards a superior goal by means of the man. It is what is called the anthropic principle, because the all exists as such to fulfill the totality of its virtual meaning through man. This all, at least for theistic thinking, that recognizes it concretely and from the particularity of materiality and rationality that fundaments it, does not express in any convincing way that its profound structure can be conducted from the inside by its inner principle, as suggested by the ontological reading of cosmological texts in the Oriental traditions. The respective nuances must be obviously analyzed, of course. Without ceasing to be material too, it is willful existence, infused with the intelligence of the becoming, itself achievable from the interrelational availability of constituting elements. Besides gathering the element, the thinking perceives under the sign of relation does not lead to understand that there is an identity between the world and the principle conducting it from the inside. The transcendence of the person. The epictetic capacity of the person expresses the possibility of transcendence, but the relation experience reveals that, irrespective of the road taken, naming and understanding, the transcendence of God remains a stage forever to reach. Consequently, man is fundamentally structured in the sense of a conscience understood as a tension between the sacred intensity of a freedom capable of continuously, epictetically comprising this transcendence, beyond which God is the object of relationship. The act in itself is not transcendence but God as a pure act, and it's in this perspective, ascending toward Him from the particularity of the being to transcend itself presupposes winning and identify forever to reach. This identity called constitute the content of the person. Only the conscience of being freely ascending towards God, fulfilling the call of relationship inscribed in the flesh of being, a freedom excelling any form of expression, reveal man's character of person. The ambiguity of the concept of depersonalization. The mirage related to the Oriental religion space is only a silly expression of native, recentering in the Western environment, of the fact that thinking tends to unify through an identity symbiosis the elements that are recognized as originating in a principle. The postulation of this constitutive principle suggests the existence of the possibility of an evolving functioning of the all in the perspective of reaching an absolute present even inside of it, but also represents the premise of the attempt to achieve the various degrees of identity in all registers of existence. For this space, God is in fact the meaning that every existence bears, possible to reach through reflection and recognition of the unity existing forever between the depth of being and the elements of the world. For example, nirvana or kaivanya, isolation, interchangeable with moksha, deliverance, are consequently cultural expression of some religious spaces for which the degrees of existence represent the same number of meanings of identification that progressively evolve towards supreme identification. The habit of studying that pantheism presupposes the idea of depersonalization is nothing but a free manner of introducing and keeping in discussion a concept that doesn't find its place even in the set of the notions that analyze the problem of pantheism. We must admit it. There is not depersonalization outside the concept of person, more precisely the conscience of the fact of being a person. I think we must avoid the term of impersonal God due to our very impossibility of divining the concept of personality. To define as impersonal a principle and the reality presupposes accepting them as lacking being, or the concept of being, be it disputable from the theological perspective, is however a postulate of tradition that do not speak about God in the personalist term of ecclesial, for example, experience. In order to experience the state of a person, it is compulsory to undertake its fundamental condition, placing oneself through relationship in relation with a self-conscious alterity. As a matter of a principle needing profound reflection, we cannot state that religious traditions that define reality, the world, the man, etc., under the sign of pantheism, do not know and do not experience the relationship and its deeper meaning. In New Delhi, in a Hindu temple, I've seen a man standing in front of Hanuman temples for a long time. My feeling was that he was not communicating to an abstract reality, nor to a multitude. Then I best understood the notion of avatar, denying the constitutive reality to any self-conscious existence, i.e., the idea of relationship coincides with standing that human beings belonging to these traditions lack something that doesn't make them world. Or man, through his very existence, continues to valorize a datum that belongs to him through creation, even if he doesn't represent it as our own theological and philosophical tradition has taught us to recognize it. I prefer to stop it.
Thank you very much. Now please address your questions. Yes, Professor Rousseau.
Very nice presentation, and a lot of issues where we need time to discuss them step by step, but I'm referring only to one. You said something about time and creation. And in Hawking's book, he said that in the 80s, I don't know exactly the year, the Vatican was organizing a conference with theologians and scientists regarding the cosmological aspects. And they were received by John Paul II, who was the Pope at the time, and he was a very, very involved person in this area, despite many other theologians. And he told them given to the audience that we have with all the scientists. You may discuss whatever you want, starting from the moment of creation onward. Not what was before. That don't deal with that. I agree, we can do this, but not what was before. And yes, Jonuts told me in the break, told me that you didn't told anything about theology, and he is right. In fact, those answers that I didn't knew to answer to you, I think theology can give you an answer because Madea told this. Maybe the better translation would be, I am the one who is.
No.
I am the one who is real.
No, the first person. It must be the first person everywhere. I am the one I am.
I am the one I am. You are not. I am. You are not.
You are right.
No, that means.
You are right.
So what do you think about us?
It's difficult to concretize in one formula. This theory, but it's very, very complicated. But in a Christian tradition, in the philosophy Christian tradition, the time is an interval. It's all an interval toward God. It's all this interval. The mystery of the time is not comprehensible, no? to our understanding. For this reason, the time remains only an interval. For the creation, for the growth of the...
So it's just another dimension like the space,
yes,
you know?
Yes, only this.
One question, Sarah, yes.
Sorry, could you just explain again your point about the impossibility of an impersonal God?
Excuse me?
You said that it's,
Yes,
that it's
yes.
impossible because
Impossible.
it relies on the concept of a personal God.
Impersonal God?
You said that an impersonal God is impossible because it relies on the concept of a personal
No.
God.
No.
Because the
That's what I'm asking for.
The opposite.
He's just asking for a clarification.
It's impossible to define an impersonal God because we don't have the este imposibil să poți să definești noțiunea de Dumnezeu impersonal atâta timp cât nu ai efectiv o definire precisă a noțiunii de Dumnezeu personal.
It is impossible to decide on the impersonal God as long as you don't have a precise definition of a personal God.
It is not adequate to talk in these terms. Yes. It's not adequate to approach the problem in terms of personal and impersonal. It's not relevant. That's what he said. It's not the...
In a theological tradition, we have this attitude to talk about the depersonalization of the being in an Oriental religion. It's a interesting perspective, but to understand this manner to experiencing religious experience very, very, very profound. We don't have the terminology, we don't have the experience, we don't have the possibility prin intermediul cuvintelor noastre să exprimăm chestia asta. Deci nu avem această posibilitate care ține de puterea cuvântului să se definim chestia asta. Și I try to read one text. Even if through the tradition that have formed them, no? People do not share the Christian religion creed, human beings continue to remain persons. That is to experience the state of relationship with an alterity. Depersonalization can only be understood in obviously relative terms as a consequence of the radical loss by the person of the forgiveness of what the ideal of person presupposes. Yet, the idea of depersonalization continues to remain a tense and ambiguous concept, generated by our impossibility to define it in opposition with the concept of person about which, no matter how hard we try to embrace it in our thought, we cannot represent it in a conclusive way in the equation of reason.
Okay. So, I will ask now our student, Alex Steve, to give us a feedback for this presentation and our discussion. Seriously.
I want first to address a question about depersonalization. Can we put this problem of depersonalization in our Christianity when Jesus say to his disciples, take the cross and follow me? Can we speak about depersonalization in this context?
The mystery of a person, be it visible in the reality of the relationship, is clear, prevents us from understanding what depersonalization supposes, because it is a secret that continues to prevent us from accurately expressing the content of what the person itself stops any beginning of definition. The only reasonable attitude allowed to us without undertaking the risk of facing ambiguity is the fact of accepting that the reality of a person, I think, is present from eternity in the creative divine world. The man only coming to receive this quality, acquiring it through the undertaking will of participating in the only coming, in the ontological assurance given in the act of relationship. So, in the act of relationship, we can define the notion of a person, but the relationship it's not a reality of a person, a reality of our experience of our day. Define the notion of a person. It's only the theoretical point of view. The rest remains only to the theoretical point of view. We don't have the possibility to define the person without the relationship with other, with a principle, with God, in meditation, I don't know.
So, just give us an outline.
First of all, I don't speak English very well, so it was a little bit hard for me to understand what all the speeches were about. But I tried to get to reach the ideas that were behind those presentations, and I was impressed about the as you mentioned, Eliade and all that professor about
Eu cred că este bine să vorbesc în românește și cineva să traducă de manieră profesională chestia asta. Nu mai bine așa. Este ok, deci eu pot să nu fac atât de tare.
În toate aceste prezentări am văzut curajul celor care au încercat să pună pe masă idei și nu s-au lăsat bătuți pentru că nu au reușit deodată de 1000 de ori și au încercat să meargă mai departe, așa cum a spus și domnul profesor Linian Rusu, că îmi pare rău pentru știință. Eu am dreptate.
Eu Einstein am spus.
During this presentation, I have especially appreciated the fact that every participant has tried to present his ideas with courage, and courage is very important in this matter, because even if he succeeded in doing what he wanted, or he didn't succeed, or he succeeded less, the thing is that he had courage and he tried to speak what he thinks and give a personal answer to what the main theme of the conference was about.
În tradițiile orientale, ideea pe care despre tradițiile orientale, ideea pe care și-o creează să spunem, gândirea occidentală, gândirea teologică și filozofică occidentală, așa, este foarte, foarte clar. Deci în spațiul acela funcționează panteismul. Și am explicat la început ce spune panteismul, ori identitatea dintre ființe,
In the Oriental tradition, pantheism functions is very functionable as a belief. And so I tried in my presentation to explain how may pantheism be active in those types of thinking.
Da, ok. Însă, în spațiul oriental, sau în spațiul misticii orientale, și fac acum referință la spus Maxim Inquisitorul,
as Maxim the professor says,
acest spațiu, această, spunem, idee de Dumnezeu impersonal, această idee impersonal, este deja receptată,
is already received,
receptată într-un dialog, într-o încercare disperată,
into a desperate attempt,
încercare disperată, de a gândi, să spunem, incoerențele, incoerențele celorlalți, în perspectiva unei logici deja prezente din sperațiunea creației.
In the perspective of yet to be, of a yet present logic of
raționalitatea creației.
About rationality of creation.
Deci, efectiv,